Each year, Portland State University's Impact Entrepreneurs team picks a theme before we start making the agenda for our next Elevating Impact Summit. These themes inspire our selection of speakers, the questions we pose in the panel discussions, and the experiences we facilitate around the event. I'm Abby, and I'm the director and curator for the Elevating Impact Summit. Thanks. So about a year ago, I was studying conflict resolution methods, and I heard of this physicist, Niels Bohr. Bohr was working with split particles, examining how two halves of a separated particle affect each other and relate to each other. You might have heard of his work on quantum entanglement. I find it very romantic. Anyways, he has this really interesting insight about opposites. He noticed that the two halves of a particle are opposite, but they're both real, they both exist, and they're both true at the same time. And in a letter to his dad pondering that discovery, he wrote the quote that we shared in the back of your summit book. "The opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth." This is another angle on thinking in opposites, where opposites are actually one in each other. After reading that, I started thinking a lot about opposites and came across a story about a social entrepreneur, Muhammad Yunus, the person who started Grameen Bank and popularized microlending around the world. Critiques of microlending aside, Yunus said that in order to approach the problem he was trying to solve, he considered what was the opposite of the status quo. Banks are usually in cities and run by people in power. What would be the opposite? Banks in rural places, he thought, run by community members with less institutional status. I wondered if other social entrepreneurs and practitioners from across disciplines were using opposites to inspire new ideas, so started asking around. One of the spaces where this started showing up beautifully is in how entrepreneurs and practitioners and organizers approach health. This next panel came together as I spoke with individuals who were considering not only social determinants of health, but creating wildly out-of-the-box approaches to addressing the problems they encountered. We have a slight change in the panel that's written in your book, and due to a family emergency, our awesome partner, Gwen Connor, will no longer join us, but in her place, she's truly found the exact right person to do it. So I'm excited to introduce you now to James Harker, the Chief Strategic Officer at Providence Health and Services. Thank you. James has a huge bio, and I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to just tell you he works on systems. And whether it's creating greater integration across the continuum of health services in Oregon or developing stronger connections between strategic vision and business operations in a large institution, James Harker thinks really big. Please welcome James and our panelists, Brendan Bassett from Metropolitan Family Service, Justine Haig from Fidgetech, and Tyrone Poole from One App Oregon.
Well, good afternoon. Abby, thank you for that terrific introduction, and particularly for the quote. This is a great conference with a particularly appropriate theme. I want to introduce how we're going to approach this discussion in just a couple of minutes by talking a little bit about the organization that I represent and where I think thinking in opposites and thinking in diverse and new ways is particularly relevant for those of us in the pursuit of health, or in my case, in the healthcare industry. I'm part of an organization that was started over 160 years ago here in the Portland area by 5 women. When these women came to the Northwest Territories, they were the only social service in this area. They were community organizers, they were fundraisers, they were health providers, they were teachers. They were innovative and creative because they had to be. And they were committed to the idea of health in general. Along the way, over the decades and years that followed, something happened, and we don't have time to talk about that, but in the United States, there was the creation of what's been referred to as a medical industrial complex that today consumes over $1 trillion and arguably does not deliver any better health than when those 5 women came to the Northwest Territories. That's a problem that we in the healthcare industry have to own. And as part of owning up to that and understanding that, we have begun to look at opposites. We have begun to look outside of our own organizations to organizations like those represented by these amazing panelists who you're going to hear from. We have begun to try to understand the idea, as Abby referred to, of social determinants of health. And the idea is simply this. The World Health Organization, as well as many other United States-based organizations, have documented the fact that, as good as organizations like Providence may think they are in health care services, the work that we do drives about 10 to 20% of the health outcome of any given population. That's not a particularly compelling number when you think about the size and the cost of these organizations. When you ask then, what's the rest? What are the other sort of drivers of health? You begin to understand them. Our own choices, our own health behaviors are a significant driver. 20 to 30% of our health status of any population, this population here today, your choices of the things that you do to your bodies and the things you put in your bodies often will have a larger determinant on health than what we could do as Providence. Your biology is a significant driver, but what we're talking about today are the other half, the social, the economic, and the environmental impacts to health. And that's the piece that I want to suggest to you that we are, as a healthcare organization, waking up to, and understanding that organizations like those represented here today have a significant impact on health status. And that's what I want you to understand from this panel. If you take something away, I want you to understand or to think about what it will mean for us to truly impact health in the future and how we need to embrace organizations and innovation like represented by our panelists. So, I have some questions that we're going to run through. We talked about these a little bit, so they won't come as a complete surprise. But what I want to do first is just ask our panelists to introduce themselves, their organizations, and talk a little bit about how their work reflects that idea of a social determinant or a new lens on health in general. Brendan, how about we start with you? We'll go to Justine and then to Tyrone.
I'm Brendan Bassett. I'm Director of Innovation and Strategic Development for Metropolitan Family Service. We like to go by MFS, a little bit easier off the tongue. We're a multi-service organization. We serve people across the lifespan with a mission to move people beyond the limitations of poverty, inequity, and social isolation. So I think when you look at that mission, MFS has been operating for about 70 years in the Portland area, and I think the idea of social determinants of health has always been baked into that mission. The idea that the environments in which people are living their lives, the schools they're going to, the restaurants they're eating at, the communities they live in, are a part of what contributes to outcomes, whether that's academic, whether that's economic, or whether it's health. And so I think this idea of social determinants is really for us sort of a fruition, if you will, of really what's been baked into the work that we do. But it's provided a helpful lens to be able to articulate that impact in more concrete ways that I think people really recognize differently.
Thank you.
I'm Justine Haig, a President Director of Fidgetech. I'm also a business professor at George Fox. Our organization is technical training for young adults on the autism spectrum. This personal passion comes from the fact I have an adult autistic son, Daniel. He'll be 20 pretty soon, April. I discovered when he was young that he was fascinated with technology. And when I went to his IEP meeting when he was about 16, and I said, what happens? What's going to go on after his transition program? They're like, I don't know. So I was like, I met a lot of other families with the same situation. As far as the health issue, I believe that it's the right of every human being to do something with their hands, to be skilled. I've seen this with the most severe person on the autism spectrum, that they want to have a job well done. And 90% of those who are on the autism spectrum are unemployed or underemployed. So that means even if our technical folks are getting jobs, it won't be in something that's challenging them mentally and also technically. So it's a personal passion to see them create a bridge of opportunities, not only just training them, working with organizations for internships and eventual employment in technology jobs.
All right, my name is Tyrone. I am the founder and president of One App. I actually went to school here and got all my prereqs out the way before I decided I wanted to be a fireman. And I went over to PCC, Cascade, and got my fire science, my EMT and paramedic. And then I got injured, right, when I joined the academy. tore my leg apart and ended up being hospitalized on and off for about 9 months. When I got out, I had nothing left. My car was repoed. My apartment, I was evicted, and I'm the oldest of 8, so it wasn't really much options there. And I ended up moving to the YMCA homeless shelter, where I was homeless for almost 3 months before I found my apartment. And now I've developed an application that will allow any person that is looking for housing to be housed in 24 hours, regardless of rental barriers, regardless of anything. That's it.
Okay. All right, so we talked backstage about sort of taking another swing through this and maybe describing a little bit more about these 3 organizations. I want you to, again, be thinking about that social determinant, that driver of health status that these 3 individuals and their organizations represent. And as a way to do that, we talked about responding to some of the discussion that you all heard as part of the Pitch Fest this morning. And I think to a person, our panel, were they called panelists or our judges, suggested that it's important for social organizations to be equally aware of and sensitive to and thinking about their what we call business model, or sort of how they're sustainable financially. So we thought it might be helpful for you all to understand the business model or the financially sustainable approach for each of these 3 organizations, perhaps to understand them just a little bit better before we drill deeper. In response, if they were to pitch, if you all had your own chance to pitch, it would be a good chance for you to then explain that perhaps a little bit. Let's go in the same order, and then we'll go from there.
Well, as I mentioned, MFS is a broad multi-service organization, but I think the example that I want to use to illustrate the way in which we're approaching business planning in collaboration with the health sector is a partnership with Providence Health, actually. We were approached around the issue of older adult social isolation, which is strongly emerging as a public health issue. There's evidence to show that older adults who are experiencing loneliness and isolation are experiencing rapid declines in health. And there's studies that show that being lonely and being in a condition of isolation is unhealthy as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of health outcomes. So this is a business problem for the Providence system, obviously, not to mention the patients themselves. As a social service agency, we've been approaching this for decades in terms of providing visiting services to older adults, helping them with light home repair, transportation, and what they need to live independently. So for us, it became kind of a translational process in partnership with Providence to say, okay, there's a business problem here around health outcomes that's impacting your patients, impacting the cost of care. We have a solution. How do we work together to really articulate that value? And I think what emerged for us was really developing a connection to what are the key cost drivers related to that? What's happening for older adults that's driving high utilization of emergency room use, for instance, or turning what should be a simple fall into a series of utilization of higher cost services. And really what was missing was that connectedness, that when these things were happening, there wasn't the same social capital. There weren't the same social networks that you or I might leverage to address an issue like that. And so we sort of use that as a lens to design a program called Community Companion, which sends professionally trained staff to the homes of isolated older adults, primarily through the lens of social connection initially. But that relationship is built into a context of coordinating care back with Providence as a clinical expert so that we can activate the clinical care that's necessary at a much earlier stage and start to generate value propositions like reducing emergency room utilization. There's huge value in that to a health system, obviously.
Right, so let me just jump in, Justine, I apologize. So a very interesting business model. We talked this morning about driving revenue to drive financial sustainability. What Brendan's talking about is understanding a population well enough to know what the cost drivers are and what organization or who actually is sensitive to that cost, and how can his organization help to save cost as a financial driver of success. So maybe a little different sort of approach to thinking about that than we heard this morning. That's terrific. Justine.
Yes, well, we're a nonprofit. About 6 months ago, we became a nonprofit. So the typical things that nonprofits do, write grants, put on events, but also we're tuition driven. So we do charge members a fee. Some of the challenges for us is, well, First of all, it's kind of an epidemic state that autism has reached. You know, in the 70s, when I was born, 1 in 20,000 were diagnosed. So there's quite a small chance that you were going to be touched by somebody that's autistic. I would guess at least 50% of the people in this room know somebody that's autistic. And now it's actually 1 in 66. So there's a lot of people, and my son who's 20 is kind of aging out of services. So there's not like this roadmap. We're like, well, how do we serve the autistic population? Well, let's just look in our book. So some of the things we've learned in doing it is they need a lot more one-on-one attention than somebody who is not on the autism spectrum. And also we're technology training, so that's an added interesting thing, is that technology trainers get paid quite a lot of money. So we're trying to bridge the gap between having small class sizes and having highly decent paid technical instructors. One thing that's great is we're a real passionate team. Everybody on our team is really dedicated to this cause. It's a personal passion. Any parent that has an autistic kid will know the biggest worry is what happens when I'm gone. That's why I do it. You know, when they're so dependent on us, and so when we're not here anymore, and if they're in a job that is not challenging, they don't have a reason to get out of bed. That's devastating as a parent. So the team is really passionate and is really drawn together by that passion, and that draws volunteers. So we're on the Intel program for volunteering, and so we really do rely on volunteers to help us a lot. So those are some of the challenges in this business.
So, but talk a little bit more about Intel, because you mentioned what they're beginning to do as an organization in sort of waking up to the value that you can bring.
Yes, so one of my personal missions, as I said before, is to try to change the world for people on the autism spectrum. And so we work with a lot of organizations in trying to create neurodiverse workforces. One of the companies in downtown that's kind of pioneered this, New Relic, has taken in 3 interns and hired autistic people on the autism spectrum and found they do a phenomenal job. One thing that they really bring to the job is they're loyal. And so they're not going to just keep leaving. They're very, very grateful to have that job, and they're going to stick with it. So working with great companies like New Relic has opened doors to working now with Intel, who sponsored a game jam we did last year. And so Intel is actually just on the cusp of starting an autism hiring program. And so basically it's called having a neurodiverse workforce. So it's not enough anymore just to be diverse. Are you neurodiverse? So we're trying to create a culture for that. We're doing a conference at Intel in April, and the whole point is to create a culture within the organization. Are you neurodiverse? Once a giant company locally like Intel gets on the books with that, it really has, we've seen that now that people are learning that, they're getting on board. This is exciting news for us and for our young adults.
So understanding, again, the value that an organization like Justine's can bring to a large organization is key to your sort of financial sustainability and how you translate that with them. That's terrific. Tyrone.
So for One App, I wanted to create a platform that was completely free for renters to find a place they qualify for. Not going around paying all these application fees, being denied, embarrassment, all that. So it's really hard to create a business that you want to not charge the actual users, right? So it was challenging. But I am a for-profit company, and I do have a market-driven solution. So we had to get really creative. And so when we first built it, we actually didn't know how, we knew the value was extreme, but we weren't sure how we were going to generate revenue. And when the app went out for the first month, we had over 1,000 people get their accounts pulled and over 500 applications sent out. And we were able to track them, and we found that only 6% of the people applied to properties that they were approved for. So most people applied to a property that they were denied or actually or conditionally approved for. Right. So the ones that they passed weren't necessarily the ones they wanted to live at. Right. And they were willing to do whatever the site required them, whatever the property required them to do. So we saw how to make revenue. Mm-hmm. So now we created a marketplace that has a ton of different products in it. So you may find that this company or this property you like says they allow no more than 8 accounts and collections. Well, you have 10. You must pay off 2 accounts to qualify for this property. or it's like you can, and maybe 2 accounts is $1,000, but there's like, or you can use our cosigner service, which is $800, or you can use our credit repair service, which can remove accounts, and it's only $200, or you can improve your credit score by using CreditWise, and that's $99, and it reports the last year, 2 years of your rental history to your credit with all your utilities, and it can jump your score 100 points. So like, there's just a ton of products that are in there. And then the PM companies, they have products too. And so we're finding that it's about 2.3 products used per renter that goes through the platform, which generates way more money than we would have made charging them $35 to get on an account. So we can actually make it to where every single person looking for housing is instantly matched to properties they qualify for free and actually generate a ton of revenue in the meantime by giving them tools. So we got creative with it.
It's amazing, right? To think about all the value. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to tweak you just a little bit further, because what I read about you also, talk about the value to the landlords, though, also, and the sort of the rebate.
Yes.
I don't know if you call it a.
So we
talk
used
about
to
that.
do a rebate, but we decided not to do that anymore with one
But
app.
just talk about the value
But
in
yes,
general to the landlord.
The value to landlords. So you think the problem is only with renters, right? That they're just struggling. But property management companies, it costs them a fortune to find renters as well. The rule of thumb is you have to go show a property 10 times to get 3 applications to get 1 approval, which means that you are driving to Vancouver to show this house over and over and over, and it actually costs you a ton of money too. Sure. So because our platform you know everything about the renter before you apply, you don't have to, I can literally send you my application and you know if I'm approved before you even go drive to show me this house. Or if it says I need to pay a double deposit or I need this and this, you can say, hey, it looks like these are the 3 remedies, which one are you gonna be able to do? And we make that conversation. Now you're driving out to show the house to approved qualified people. Right. So now instead of 10, it's a 1-to-1 drive out to show a property. And then the other biggest piece is that, yes, we do allow upgrades for properties too, so we do make money off them, even though the base is free. Mm-hmm. But the tools that we give them, they can't get anywhere else. Sure. So, I mean, it's like, because we have the first database of renters with their background checks, if you have a vacancy on the website and it's maybe a house has been on it for 30 days, the system automatically says, hey, you've lost $2,000 on this house. Nice. Did you know there's 60 people that qualify for this house within 5 miles? And then they click the button that says see all 60, and you're like, yes. And then you click it and it's like, this exciting new feature is only $199.
There you go. Oh, well done.
So, generate money.
So there you go. Budding entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, 3 very viable and sustainable business models. Excellent. Okay. So let's dig into that a little bit further. The idea of elevating impact, our theme for our conference. We talked to our 3 panelists also about the idea of being sort of mentors, the opportunity for 45 minutes of being a mentor, and perhaps ask them to share with you examples of keys to success, something that they would point to that have helped them to be successful, either a resource, a partner, whatever it may be. I won't lead you any further than that, but perhaps give us an example there, and maybe Justine, I'll have you start this time and we'll kind of go that direction there.
Okay. Yes, well, you can imagine as a nonprofit, you need to make sure you're out there. So I network like crazy. I'm a business professor at George Fox, so I had a sabbatical last year. So on my sabbatical, I met anybody that was interested in technology and autism. So, I've done 3 TAO pitches. I've spoken in numerous different places. Here I am today, because I'm trying to network. And I know that there's other people out there that are deeply concerned about this issue like I am. So organizations that have been superb, TAO, we're a member organization, just became one with the TAO, Technology Association of Oregon, if you didn't know, they're amazing. Also the Autism Societies, the ASO, so anybody kind of involved with the Autism Society and people trying to help young people, VR, so when you have a young adult on the autism spectrum, they go to VR and then they work with a counselor to help them find a job. So we're on board with VR, so if you go in, if a counselor looks in, someone says, I'm technical and I'm on the autism spectrum, they can look in their computer and then we'll come up. And so if they're socially disadvantaged, then VR will pay for our program. So really, really getting out there, networking with people, let them know you're out there, and just them coming to, we have evening classes, that's how we started out. We use Park Academy in Lake Oswego, so I knew the director of there, and she was awesome, and so she let us use the school. It was brand new built when we got in there. So just building great relationships with people that respect what you're doing and want to help you is really, really critical for us as a nonprofit.
That's great. That's terrific. Brendan, you wanna go?
I think another key for me and for MFS, similarly in terms of being a nonprofit, really involved, I think, a matter of getting into networks, relationships, getting to tables where we're interacting with people we wouldn't normally interact with, right? We have an array of products and services that we know has an impact on things that people are talking about and people are concerned about, but we haven't necessarily done the translational work, right, across sectors. And so for me, I think it was really a lot of what you described, Justine, in terms of hitting the pavement and connecting to people who care about these things and defining them and talking about them in ways that were maybe outside of the usual lexicon that I might use as a nonprofit director, and talking about the people that we're serving, that we share the desire to have an impact on people in the same way. We might just go about it differently, but where can we find common ground? And so I think elevating the conversation to that level of shared impact, where do we both want to make impact, and then we can figure out the details in terms of making that translational work on the back end. But first you have to get to the table and you have to kind of develop a shared vocabulary that you can use to talk about what you're trying to achieve together. And I found that to be really, really helpful in moving it forward. Also very time consuming but and a lot of energy, but absolutely necessary to making sure that the solutions that we develop actually achieve the impact we've agreed on.
Got it. Thank you. Tyrone?
I agree with you from when you said the very first time. Understanding your clients, your customer, is the key to success for me, at least for One App. Even when I didn't own One App, when I was working at the YWCA homeless shelter, or when I was working with the other programs, I think the reason I excelled is because I understood the families when other people weren't. And so you got to understand that the employee staff makeup that is always there, a bunch of volunteers. They're always young, right out of college. Usually have maybe one or two actual people with degrees, but the degrees are supposed to help you understand the people, but if you never were one of them, then it's really tough. And so the fact that I was homeless for so long, the fact that the day I got into the homeless shelter, I got that award letter, and I was so excited because it paid rent anywhere I wanted to live in Portland. And then 3 months later, I was still in the shelter with that letter that paid rent anywhere because I was denied everywhere. If you don't go through that, then you start judging people for the wrong, you start looking at people's behaviors. You start expecting from them. We have programs that we ask them to accomplish these things during the time they're in the shelter. And very, very often they failed. And I remember when I had my programs, I failed almost all of them.
Yeah.
But I worked my butt off. It was just that the programs were talking about doing things like, oh, did you go apply for food stamps? And did you go to the WIC office and do this? Did you do this, this, this? And you have all these tasks that you want them to do, but they're homeless.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a place, nothing else matters. Yep. You know? And so it's like I can't focus on anything if I don't have a roof over my head. And then they have things that they've done, and you're like, well, we can't trust this person to this because they stole. Or we can't trust this person to do this because they have a tendency to act like this. And you're like, I went to jail 3 times during that 90-day time period. All right? 1 for fighting on the max, 1 for stealing, 1 for but that's not even who I was. You know, I sat on a panel once with a lady who she was a wealthy woman and she owned the newspaper that I was in, and she didn't understand that the fact that I remember I tried to help her understand what it's like to be in that situation. So I gave her a scenario and I said, because I asked her, would she ever bite anybody? And she looked like, oh my God, of course not. I would never put my mouth on somebody. That's disgusting. And then I said, what if I put my hands around your neck and start to choke you and you couldn't breathe? At the beginning, you might look at me like I'm crazy. What am I doing? Then you might try to fight me, hit me off. But how long until biting, not biting, comes off the table? Right? Exactly. I mean, at some point, everything is okay. Because at the end of this, you got to get me off, right? That's how housing is. When women have done bad things and they've used their bodies or people have stole all these things, that's not who they are. It's just because of that situation. And so when you actually can come to the table and you can look at the people for what the reality is, then you can understand your customer, and then you can make them successful. And I had to learn that through my
Yep. Yep. So this is a great theme. I want to just dig into this a little bit further. So Tyrone's sort of lesson is, knowing your customer, being really aware of their need. But he introduced another sort of element or frame, a different lens through which to look at that, and that is sort of misperceptions. Understanding kind of what are those common misperceptions that perhaps people have. Knowing how broad of a network you need to build for your organization, the support that you need, the awareness that you need. Inevitably, these kind of misconceptions that you're beginning to talk about come up. Can you just speak to that just a little further? And then I want to go kind of down this way and perhaps get some of the same feedback from our other two panelists about that idea.
Yeah, misconceptions, God, with homeless people,
Right.
The first misconception is that they're there due to some fault of their own. And that's a big one. Oh, this person needs to get off drugs. They need to get. I had the same. When I moved into, so first of all, I never just walked to a shelter because I needed a place to live. I actually had nowhere to go, and my leg, I had an injury, so I was bleeding internally, and I ended up throwing up on the max track because I was lightheaded, and the police thought I was drunk, and so they were yelling at me, and then I realized that I was just nauseous, and they asked me where I wanted to go. I had nowhere to go, so he took me to the homeless shelter. So that's the only reason I actually went. When I got there, I was like, everybody in here is probably full of alcoholics or drug users or all these people. I'm not like any of them. I'm just here for this because I got injured in the fire academy, and I'm just trying to recover. And almost nobody in there was like that. I mean, there was women in there that was hiding from domestic violence, and every time the door opened, they were about to have a heart attack. Right. There were students in there, that got in a fight on campus, and they were kicked off, and they needed money to get back to where they came from. I mean, a million scenarios. And even though I was on crutches for a year, and I could not work, and I couldn't earn any income, I still would not have traded places with some of the people that had some of the scenarios that was in that room. And that was, so when you really get to understand what those misconceptions are of those type of people, everybody. So the biggest thing that I took away from that is when I started to work there and I saw the numbers, and I saw that 70% of people can't go one paycheck, can't miss a single paycheck before being at risk of homelessness, and 90% of people can't go 3 months without a paycheck before being homeless. So every single person is only a paycheck away from being at risk of homelessness. Yeah. So when you see that, you're like, okay, I got to open my eyes to reality now. This is not due to faults on their own. This could be any person at any time for any reason.
Perfect.
And so,
perfect. Thank you, Tyrone. Yeah, Justine.
Yeah, so like I said before, when I asked people, I guessed about 50% of you know someone on the autism spectrum. Usually when I speak somewhere, I ask that question to the crowd. And then I always follow up with, but do you know how that's going to impact them? How is it going to impact their work, their possible relationships, just their home life? And so we might know somebody on the autism spectrum, but how that's actually going to impact them, people don't understand. Often they look disinterested. Some of the people in my program I thought were really bored. The parents called me like the next day and be like, my son's life has changed. He was so excited. Last night, I was like, he was? Okay. And so I'm like, that kind of feedback we need to know because often we can't tell. And so they just look sometimes really placid. We were helping, we started out at night programs. Now we're collaborating with PCC and also Epicodus, which is a trade certificate program. But I remember one of our students, when he was at PCC, we met with him and one of the teachers. And after, I talked to the teacher after, and she's like, he's going to be a lot of work. And it seemed so negative, and I said, he's got a 4.0 in computer science. Like, he's literally a genius. So, and the teacher was really taken back because you just could not take that away from having that interaction with him. Several months later, the student got an A in the class, and I saw the same teacher, and I said, hey, how's it going? She says, you know what? I really miss that student. My class has not been the same without him. And so these people are not a charity case. They actually improve your life. I told my son the other day, I'm a better person because of you. And my son, it was not easy to raise. There was a lot of sleepless nights. He cried probably 70% of the time. He self-harmed. He got over it when he was about 11. So it wasn't an easy road, but today he's just like my best friend, and he's adorable. They have a beautiful human spirit, and so they have amazing ability to live in the moment. So like on Monday morning, it's time for shower. My son's like, shower, let's go. And I'm like, you do know it's Monday morning, right? And you are going to school now. And so you have a person like that around you, whether they're in your class, you're teaching them, they're your own child. That's awesome. Like, that helps me to be a better person. So it's not without the difficulties. And there's no roadmap, as I said before. But they're amazing human beings. And also some have extra special skills, such as pattern recognition. If you might have seen The Good Doctor, that's a show about an autistic adult who is a doctor, and he's on the autism spectrum. He sees all his patients, like, that he memorized literally, like what the inside of their bodies look like, the human body. I met this one girl, and I said, oh, what do you like to do? She's like, oh, I quite like reading. I said, oh, what have you read lately? She's like, well, this morning I read the new Harry Potter book. I'm like, isn't it like this big? She's like, yeah, it was pretty good. So they themselves don't even know how talented they were. And then at one of our night classes a few weeks ago, there was a girl and a guy, and they're talking to each other, and the guy was listing off a whole bunch of numbers. He was going to add them up, and she's like, 2,763. And he's like, checked it, and she's like, can't everybody do that? No, we cannot. So just that there's amazing skills. And then one thing that's sometimes seen as negative is their brutal honesty. And, if you've seen The Good Doctor, they have a scene where he comes in, and he's a surgeon too, and he says to the patient's like, what is it, doctor? Is it serious? Am I going to die? And he's like, probably. And so sometimes they're really honest, but you know what? Sometimes it's really refreshing. And being British, we tend to be a bit more outspoken and say what we think anyway. So maybe they've just all evolved from Britain. I don't know, but anyway.
Fair enough. All right, excellent example. Brendan.
Yeah, so MFS has a program called ARP Experience Core, where we match older adult volunteers to work with children on reading, supporting their literacy. And I recall, I ran this program for a while, and I recall, this happens a lot, but I recall one particular mentor who was really having challenges working with the kids, and came in and had lots of things to say about the kids' behavior and what was going on, why don't these parents support their kids, right? Making all sorts of attributions about why this kid was having trouble in school, most of which centered on the child themselves or the family at home. And so we had lots of conversations, and really, one thing that I think was helpful in pushing past that, and I think this speaks to the idea of social determinants, is the idea that behavior is communication. It's telling us something. This child is telling us something in the choices that he's making in the time you're spending together. You need to listen to that first before you try to introduce a solution. You need to understand what's going on in this child's life. You need to understand the context in which they're trying to learn before you can propose a solution. And I think, it's one simple example, but it really can bubble up to a large-scale way in which you can approach designing social solutions. That if we just look at a large system and make the mistake that our solution needs to be large and complex, and we can examine this large behemoth of an issue, then I think we miss the point. I think we have to think about understanding people at an individual level, and if we design for the individual, then we get to scale for the masses. And so, and I think that's something we do maybe intuitively in community-based organizations in a way that can really, when we partner across sectors, can bring a different lens.
Yep. Excellent. So let's take that and sort of turn it outward a little bit and think about, as advocates for these populations for whom you are designing kind of health initiatives, and the things you've learned about common misconceptions, what has that taught you then about human behaviors on the part of people you're trying to work with? We talked earlier, many of you mentioned that the idea that networking and communication and engagement with people is critical to your success and your growth. What have maybe these misconceptions, what have some of that networking, communication, what has that taught you about just human behaviors and interactions with other people that would be helpful to our budding social entrepreneurs? Oh, I'm sorry, Tyrone, let's start with you. We'll go in the same order.
Following you again, just don't guess. You know,
Okay.
that's a really do the work, do the research, and figure out what it is that your customer wants. Backstage, I was telling them about when we launched One App and we marketing campaigns, and we were like, hey, one application, you can see 1,000 places you qualify for, and so maybe that's a driver to get people to click and come to the website. Or we'd say like, free or not free. Sorry, we had like 1 million different marketing ads, and then when we did a survey on a lot of the people, and we were like, okay, out of our barrage of ads, what is the reason that you chose to use our platform to find housing? And the answer was, well, on your app it was $35, but the property said if I applied through them it was $50. And I was like, all the amazing things that we built.
Yeah.
And the fact that the property, when you were on site, they said, oh, you can apply using the One App platform or you can apply our standard. And that $15 is why you chose. And that was 95% of people.
Sure.
So it just made it like, okay, I guess our ad needs to say, cheaper. Cheaper. Cheap. Right? So you gotta learn, you gotta listen to what it is that they're looking for. So.
Thank you.
Yes, I guess prepare to be surprised, kind of following what you said. Recently, last term in our evening program, a mother said, she was signing her son up, and she says he's never had a computer before, but he just took his college entrance exams, and he got into calculus, so he could be good at coding. So he comes in, and this student doesn't really talk very much, and he sits down, and we're like, okay, we'll try to code this, and this guy kills it. He's like one of our best coders. So it's like, you just cannot judge a book by its cover. And so our conceptions of what we thought it just surprises me every day. The one student, he's actually just about to graduate from Epicodus, so he is doing C#, so he'll have a trade certificate in web design and web development. But when we first met him, he was in our night classes. He basically, we never knew where he was. We tried to text him, he wouldn't answer. He was always late. He was playing games all night. And then now, he's graduating, and he called me, and he was wanted to recommend a friend, and he was just like, hello. And she had this big social conversation with me. I was like, who is this? Are you sure it's you? I was really, really surprised. And so he's applied for 7 internships, and he on the front his cover letter he said, I'm an autistic adult on the spectrum, and read on if you're interested in having me as an intern, but I can do all this stuff. And so all 7 of the people that he put an application in for want to interview him. So I just thought that's amazing. And so this program he just finished, this is someone that would never get out of bed. It starts at 8 in the morning and goes to 5. Every single day of the week for 6 months, and he didn't miss a single day, and he wasn't late. Okay, prepare to be amazed, I think.
Prepare to be amazed. That's great. Brendan.
I think something I've learned is certainly that we often tend to approach designing a program or a service or a product not really taking human behavior into account. We really think about the behavior that we want to see, right? We kind of think about the end result that we're trying to achieve before, really considering the human element. And I think of the program that I mentioned earlier in Community Companions, visiting isolated older adults, right? That problem seems so clear to us. It seems so clear to us and our partners at Providence. We have this quick design process where it's this beautiful solution of sending out companions into the community, and who wouldn't want that, right? Guess what? Older adults didn't want it because they didn't see themselves as isolated. They didn't see themselves as lonely. It's not how they defined themselves. We were defining them in that way. And that was a big aha moment for us to say, wow, we really missed a step here. It seems so simple in the aftermath, but that was after 2-3 months of design work, right? And so I think what that said was what we need to do is go out and talk to people about what this could do for them. We used examples of what companions were doing, with other clients that, hey, some of our companions are helping people, use technology for the first time to connect to family that lives out of state, or they're, they're making a grocery list together to talk about, healthy eating, right? There were all these things those were things they wanted, right? And we just knew that by doing that together with somebody that it would address that underlying social isolation. And so I think it was just a huge sort of different approach to really human-centered design.
Yeah. that term, human-centered design, is certainly something that we could dig into, or another group could certainly do that. So a lot of themes about knowing the population, knowing the people. They are individuals, they are people, they are beautiful, glorious individual people. But knowing them, understanding them, if you would suggest to serve them. And some of that certainly through asking questions, but a lot of it through lived experience as well. I would just, as we're wrapping up, I would just call your mind back. I was super impressed with Riddy Cruz's talk and the it's Riddy, right? Is that how you pronounce her name? Riddy. And she said something that was really compelling to me that I've been thinking about as I've listened to these three panelists. And she referred multiple times to calling you forward, and strong sort of mentors or partners who called her forward. And I would just hope that the last 45 minutes that you've had to spend with these terrific panelists has called you forward a little bit, has maybe given you a few tips, but certainly inspired you to think about the population that you would serve and how you would contribute to health. And that you've learned something, and I would encourage you also to give them the chance personally to call you forward. I'm sure each of them would be willing to do that. Join me in thanking our panelists.